Distraction is rarely loud. It hums. It hums in the ping of a message, the edge of a tab left open, the thought of what everyone else is doing while you're trying to do the one thing you promised yourself you would finish today. You sit down to work, and 10 minutes later, you're nowhere near the target. You're reading headlines, reorganizing a desk that wasn't the problem, or comparing your pace to someone else's highlight reel. The day ends, and effort feels strangely weightless, as if you carried water in your hands and arrived with nothing to drink. Have you ever felt your energy scatter like that? Poured out in many directions, powerful in none. Stay with me to the end. This story might change how you hold your attention. It's about a young archer who could draw a bow with perfect form, who trained longer than anyone, and who still watched his arrows skid past the mark. He wasn't weak. He wasn't lazy. But when he lifted his bow, his eyes were everywhere but the center. And where the eyes wander, the arrow follows. Today, we'll enter a quiet field where a mentor says almost nothing, and yet says exactly what the boy needs. We'll watch as noise fades, the circle sharpens, and the bowstring sings. This isn't merely about archery. It's about the invisible bridge between desire and result, the narrow road where scattered power becomes impact. If you've been missing by inches, the lesson may be simpler and sharper than you think. Long ago, in a quiet village bordered by green fields and forest edges, archery was more than a pastime. It was a tradition that marked the turning of seasons and the pride of families. Each year, the villagers gathered for a contest on the open field. Wooden targets, painted in circles of red and white, stood in the sun like waiting eyes. Young men and women lined up with bows, their hearts racing for the chance to prove their skill. Among them was a boy named Aaron. He was strong and eager, his arms shaped by long days of practice. No one doubted his energy, and yet his arrows rarely found the mark. Each time he drew the bow, his glance shifted to the laughter of the crowd, the movement of the other competitors, the shadow of doubt whispering in his mind. He tried harder, loosed arrow after arrow, but the shafts thudded into the earth or skimmed the wood far from the center. His frustration grew heavy, like a stone tied to every shot. The villagers began to notice. Some shook their heads, others chuckled softly, comparing him to boys younger yet steadier. Aaron's chest burned with shame. He wanted not only to win, but to show that his hours of training were not in vain. Deep inside, he knew strength was not his problem. Something else, something hidden, was standing between him and the target. But he could not name it. On that field, with the sun sinking lower and failure pressing close, Aaron whispered to himself that he would find the answer, whatever it cost. He longed for a way to still the noise and discover why his arrows, though fierce in flight, never touched the circle he desired. That evening, when most of the villagers had drifted home, one figure remained by the targets. An older man, his hair streaked with silver, leaned lightly on a carved walking stick. His eyes followed Aaron, who stayed behind, firing arrow after arrow into the growing dusk. The boy's breath came heavy, his shoulders tight, yet the arrows still slid wide. At last, he lowered his bow in defeat. "You carry strength in your arms," the old man said, his voice calm as wind through leaves, "but your eyes are scattered." Startled, Aaron turned. He recognized the man. Eldrin, once the finest archer in the village, now remembered more as a storyteller than a competitor. Eldrin walked closer, his steps unhurried, and stood beside the worn target. "You watch the crowd, the shifting light, even the doubt in your own chest. "Your arrow follows your gaze," Eldrin said, tapping the painted bullseye. "If your eyes wander, so will your aim." Aaron swallowed hard. Then what should I do? The mentor lifted the boy's bow, set an arrow, and drew the string. His eyes locked on the circle's center with a stillness so complete, it felt as if even the wind held its breath. He loosed, and the arrow struck near the heart of the target. Not perfectly centered, but unwaveringly close. "Fix your eyes only here," Eldrin said, pointing at the mark. "Ignore the noise. Let nothing else exist. When your focus is whole, your arrow will follow." He handed the bow back to Aaron, who felt both chastened and strangely hopeful. The lesson sounded simple, but the boy sensed its weight, like a key given to a locked door. He nodded, silently promising himself to attempt what his master demanded. The next morning, before the village stirred, Aaron returned to the field. The dew still clung to the grass, and mist curled low over the ground. He set up his bow, remembering Eldrin's words, "Fix your eyes only here." He drew, exhaled, and aimed. For a moment, his vision sharpened on the bullseye, but then came the caw of a crow, the rustle of leaves, the memory of laughter from yesterday. His eye flickered, the arrow slipped wide, and frustration surged again. He tried once more, and once more. The same failure repeated itself. His muscles grew sore, his hands blistered, and his spirit felt heavier with every miss. The lesson seemed impossible. How could a single glance control the fate of an arrow? Each sound from the village, each thought in his head pulled him away. Aaron wanted to scream, to throw down the bow and give up, but he remembered Eldrin's calm face, the arrow sinking near the center. He remembered the quiet certainty in the old man's voice. And so, instead of quitting, Aaron sat in the grass and closed his eyes. He listened to the sounds around him, not to chase them away, but to let them be. The crow, the wind, the distant voices, all part of the world, yet not his target. Slowly, he rose again. This time, when he lifted his bow, he fixed his sight on the center of the circle. The noises did not vanish, but he allowed them to fade into the edges of his awareness. He breathed deep, released, and the arrow struck closer. Not the bullseye yet, but nearer than before. His heart leapt. Day after day, Aaron repeated this practice. He learned to notice the stirrings of distraction and return, again and again, to the circle. The villagers who passed by chuckled at his persistence. "He'll never change," some whispered. But others began to watch in silence as the arrows landed straighter, surer, steadier. Then came the true test, the annual contest. The field filled with voices, clapping hands, stamping feet. Aaron's chest thumped with nerves. The old doubts returned. What if he failed again, in front of everyone? What if the crowd's noise shattered his focus? His palms sweated as he lifted the bow. All eyes pressed upon him, heavy as stones. He inhaled. Eldrin's voice echoed in his memory. "Let nothing else exist." Aaron fixed his gaze on the bullseye. For the first time, the circle expanded, filling his whole vision. The laughter, the whispers, even his own fear dissolved. Only the target remained. He loosed. The arrow flew like a streak of light. It cut through the noise, the air, the doubts, and struck dead center. A gasp rippled through the crowd. For a breathless second, silence ruled the field. Then cheers erupted, rising like a wave. Aaron lowered his bow, his hands trembling, but his eyes alight with a new kind of strength. In that moment, he understood. The contest was not against the crowd, nor even the target. It was against the wandering of his own mind. When the cheers faded and the crowd drifted away, Aaron remained by the target. His chest still rose with the rhythm of triumph, but deeper than pride was a quiet wonder. What had truly changed? He had always possessed the same bow, the same strength, the same training. Yet today, something invisible had shifted, and his arrow had obeyed. Eldrin appeared once more, stepping through the dispersing crowd with that same calm presence. He touched the arrow lodged in the center, then turned to the boy. "Do you see now?" he asked softly. Aaron nodded, though words struggled to form. "It was not my arms, it was my eyes, my mind." The old master smiled. "Your arrow goes where your eye rests. Your life follows the same rule. If you scatter your focus across 100 places, your strength, though great, will scatter with it. But if you give yourself wholly to one aim, your effort becomes sharp, unstoppable. That is why you missed before, not for lack of power, but for lack of focus." The truth pierced Aaron deeper than any arrow could. He replayed his long hours of practice, his restless eyes, his burning frustration. He realized he had not only been distracted by the crowd, but by his own hunger for approval, his fear of failure, his need to prove himself. All these had been side targets, stealing his attention from the only mark that mattered. The bow had revealed what his heart needed to learn. To be whole, he must first be undivided. Eldrin placed a hand on his shoulder. "This field is only practice. Beyond it, life will set up many targets. Some will shine, some will shout, some will beg for your attention. If you let your gaze wander, you will feel busy but arrive empty. But if you choose the right aim and hold fast, you will find both success and peace." Aaron bowed his head, a mixture of gratitude and resolve flooding his chest. For the first time, he understood that archery was only the metaphor. The true target was life itself. And for those who listen to this story, the lesson reaches outward. In our own days, the distractions may not be crowds or contests, but the constant buzz of phones, the lure of comparison, the pressure to do everything at once. We too scatter our energy, firing arrows in all directions, wondering why nothing strikes deep. Yet the principle is timeless. Focus is the bridge between desire and result. To steady the eye is to steady the outcome. So ask yourself, what is the bullseye of your life right now? What matters more than the noise, more than appearances, more than fleeting approval? If you can answer that and hold your gaze there, then like the young archer, you will discover that your arrows were never weak. They were only waiting for your focus. The field was quiet now, the target standing still beneath the fading light. Aaron gathered his arrows, but the one lodged in the bullseye remained, a reminder of what was possible when his gaze no longer wandered. He knew tomorrow he would miss again, at least sometimes. He knew life outside the field would bring noise, temptation, and doubt. Yet something inside had settled. He had discovered that focus was not the silence of the world, but the silence within. And that is where the story reaches us. We walk through days filled with shifting voices, endless options, glowing screens, and invisible demands. Our energy scatters, our goals blur, and we wonder why our efforts feel thin. But what if, like the young archer, we chose one clear mark? What if, even when noise roared, we returned our eyes to the circle that matters most? Focus is not the absence of distraction. It is the decision to return, again and again, to the center. Every time you catch your mind drifting and guide it back, you strengthen the muscle of clarity. And over time, The arrows of your life, your work, your dreams, your relationships, begin to land where you intend. So let the image remain. A single arrow embedded in the heart of the target, firm against the wood, unmoved by the crowd's noise. Let it remind you that your strength is already enough, your aim already true, if only you grant it the gift of undivided attention. Do not fear the noise. Do not chase every passing call. Fix your eyes on what is worth hitting and let the rest fade. For your life, like the arrow, will always follow where you choose to look. If this story of the archer stirred something in you, let it be more than a passing thought. Ask yourself what target deserves your focus today, and take one step toward it with clarity. And if this message touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with a friend who may be lost in distractions and searching for direction. For more stories that breathe courage and light into everyday struggles, subscribe to this channel. Each tale is a reminder that within the ordinary lies extraordinary wisdom, waiting to guide you back to center.